In this video, we're going to be covering the user interface for BobCAD-CAM. Now, to get started, every time you launch the software, it's going to open up the BobCAD 1 file, and it should set everything up on the Home tab. Now, the Home tab is where we can find our cut, copy, paste, and delete, as well as one of the ways to get into the Select Mode option. It's also where we can find options for picking geometry by their layer, by their color, or picking and matching colors, radiuses, and layers, as well as line styles. We can modify our entities from here, as well as change how we modify to current or just modify geometry and some of the attributes of the geometry, like the color, the line style, the point style, or the layer. We have our selection mask, which is found here, as well as down here currently. I will eventually move it over to the left side of my screen. And then we have an option for turning mode. Now, above the Home tab right here, we have our Quick Access toolbar, which allows us to open a new document, open an existing document. So this is how we're going to open up BobCAD files that we've already worked on or maybe had from a past version, as well as all the different file types that we support, which we'll look at when we go into the Open dialog through File here in a second. We have a quick command to save. We have a quick command to save as. This quick command gets us into our settings. And then we have undo and redo right there. Now, if we click on File, this loads the back stage of the system. And we have some options once again. So we have New, which is just going to open up a new window, just a blank window. Right down here, we have Open. So if we click on Open, it's going to allow us to open up a specific file type. Now, if we click on this drop-down menu, from just above the Open button at the bottom, we'll see all the supported file types. So we have our file types, which are BBCD, and this is what you're going to want to save all your part files as, because this has the ability to save all the geometry as well as all the toolpath you put on it. We have our BobCAD files, which are BBCDX, which can go from BobCAD to SolidWorks, and BobCAM for SolidWorks. We can actually open the files up from there. We have our .CAD, which is older version BobCAD files. And then getting into the part files that aren't ours directly, we have IGES, DXF, DWG, SAT, 3DM, X_T and X_B, SLD, PRT or SolidWorks part files, step files, and STL files. So if I was to click on, say, IGES here, we could see that the only file type that pops up is IGES, and it's just an IGES generic solid model of the CAD tutorial. I'm not going to open that now. I'll just hit cancel. And then if I go back into File, we have our Save and Save As well as Merge, which allows us to have a window open, and we can basically do a file open when we merge, but instead of opening a new window with the part file, it just grabs the geometry and brings it into the currently opened window. Close is going to close the drawing we're currently working on. Print is going to allow us to print whatever we have on our screen, and we could change our print scale and really any setting we need to print this. Right here's our recent files. So these are going to be the 25 most recent files we've had opened up based on this number right down here at the bottom. Right here we have our user profiles. So I'm going to go ahead and make myself a new user profile so I can get it set up with my layout the way I want it. So I'm going to start by hitting New Layout, and I'm just going to use this little pencil option right here, the little button with a pencil, to rename my layout, and I'm just going to call it Mike Layout, so I know which one I need to reload if I ever need to reload it. So now that I have the Mike layout created, and so then I can just double click and that would be my layout. So if I ever need to reset BobCAD, say I accidentally closed some of these menus down on accident and I need to bring them back, you can't always right click on the top option here and bring them back this way. Or if you've saved yourself a layout, now I can just go to File, double click on Mike Layout, and it'll reset my user interface for me back to how I set it when I saved that option. And then down below that, I'm going to go to Help. We're not going to look at Lua plugins. And this is where we can find the help system. So if we click on this top option, it's going to launch the help system. Right here, we have our Getting Started page, so we could begin a new document or open an existing document. Below that, we have our tip of the day, and if you click on it, it will change the tip of the day right there. This little checkbox is whether or not we're retrieving the newest online help whenever we click this button, or whether if we uncheck it, we're loading just the built-in help system. So the one online is going to be the most up-to-date, so I recommend leaving that on if the computer's online. Right below that, we have Activate License. And Activate License is how we register the software. Now, if you add a new product onto your license, you will have to re-register the software. And you can do that just by clicking this button and then registering either via the internet or via email. Right below that, we have Transfer License. And this is essentially deauthorizing your license or deregistering your license, whatever you want to call it. You don't have to call us to do this. All you have to do is say Transfer License, automatically via the internet or manually via email, hit next, and then right here you're going to enter your license ID, and then you'll re-register it on a new computer the first time you log in. Now down here we have Show License Status, which allows us to see our license status on which functions we have added to the license itself, as well as retrieve the customer ID and license ID in case you need it again. And then if you have a network license, this is where you'll be able to check out from the network and take the license with you. So if you have it on a laptop that's normally connected to your work network and you want to take it home, you can actually check out the license and bring the whole thing home. Now, the other bit of important information that's on this page is right here, your build number. Now, your build number may not match the build number I currently have. There will be official releases that have specific build numbers. If you're not sure which one to use, you can usually find them on BobCAD-support.com or just BobCAD.com, or you can call tech support and ask them which build is the most current. And if you're not on the most current, we will get you up to being current. Right over here, we then have our settings we're going to look at in the next video. And then finally, the last option for the File tab is Exit, which is going to start shutting down the software. Now, when I back out of there, the next tab we have after Home would be Create 2D, which has points, lines, arcs, splines, rectangles. Pretty much anything you're going to do with wireframe is going to be found on this page. Right here, we have our Create 3D tab, which is where we can create our primitive shapes or solids. We have extrusion tools, subtraction, addition, and intersection tools for our solids. We have our surfaces, like skin and foredge, as well as filleting and stitching. So the big thing with these two menus, the Create 2D and the Create 3D, is actually just right there in their name. The important word is create. With these two tabs, you're creating the geometry that you want to see. So you're creating points and lines and arcs or solids and surfaces. Now, the Utilities tab is a bit different because in this tab, you're not really creating geometry. You're modifying something that already exists. So Translate, which is our move function, you need geometry on the screen to be able to move it. So a lot of these functions rely on having the geometry on the screen already there, and then you're modifying it in some way. The Evaluate tab is where we can find our dimensioning options here, as well as just direct measurements here on Measure 1 and Measure 2. And then right here we have our CAM tab, which allows us to start our new CAM job, go through our current settings, check our defaults, go into the tool library, just anything we need to do for CAM that doesn't directly pertain to creating toolpath right now. From there, if we go over to the left side, we have our Data Entry tab, and if we look at the bottom, there may be multiple tabs unless you've moved them around. This is pretty much how it opens up by default. So I have my Data Entry tab, which is anytime I go into a feature that needs me to define something like a rectangle, it's going to show up on the Data tab. Next to that, we have our CAD tree. This is going to follow along with us as we draw our part, just to give us kind of an idea of how we drew the part. It's especially powerful when you're working with solids because it tracks everything you do with a solid. It does not track every line or point you put in, or really a lot of the 2D options don't show up on here. But when you get into 3D, anything you do to that solid model will show up here, so you could follow along with the changes you made. Next to that, we have our CAM tree, which is where we could start our CAM job from. This is where we're going to do our turning, our milling, our wire EDM, our mill turn, as well as laser, plasma, water jet. We have one CAM tree that's going to run it all. Next to that, we then have our Bob Art tab. You may not have Bob Art on your license, and if you don't, go ahead and just click this X right here, and it won't show up anymore. But if you do have Bob Art, here it is. It gives us the ability to vectorize images, as well as emboss models to go from a 2D to a 3D surface. Now on the far right side of the screen, the first thing we're going to see is selections. Now selections is a set of geometry that you've selected once and then said save current selection. And what that's going to do is it's going to add it to this list here. And what's very cool is if you're doing parts where you have to pick the same boundary or the same geometry over and over again, instead of having to re-pick it, you can pick it once and then save that selection and actually pick it from this list. If we look at the other tab on there, we have our measure entity box. So as we take measurements using the evaluate, measure 1, and measure 2 options, they will show up right here. Right here we now have our layers in the middle, and we can see we can add a new layer here. We could add new groups, so you can now add groups to your layers. So if you're working on 2 separate parts and you want them grouped a little bit differently, you can group things together. And what's cool is if you have a group with some options inside of it. So if I'm on that group and I add some layers to it, these 2 new layers that I just added are under this one group. But this one eyeball controls all of the layers as long as the layers aren't active. So if I put my check mark up here and I hide that full group, all of those layers would get hidden because they're part of that one group. In my case, I don't have anything on the actual geometry, so nothing's really in there. We could also choose modify to current. So that means if I select a piece of geometry and I just click this little button, it'll modify to whatever layer has the check mark on it. That's our current active drawing layer. And then right here we have a move out, which allows us to move our layers out of a group, so like so, as well as moving our layers up and down as needed. We could also delete layers, as well as move things to a new group or move to an existing group. Right down here, we then have our UCSs, which are our current drawing planes. So we have our top plane by default, we have a front plane right there, and we have a side plane right there. So it's just different ways of drawing on our part in different views. And then over on the far right, we have our posting tab, which is going to show us our code when it is posted. And then we have our BobCAD Live toolbar, which I'm just going to drag over here and make a bit bigger. And this is going to allow us to get to the getting started, go to the website where it shows the training seminars, upcoming webinars, videos. You have your live chat on our website. You can get into the premium access part of your support. You can submit or view a ticket. And then right here, you could go see post processors or our knowledge base. And I'm just going to close that one down. Now for the user interface for the CAD window, this inside window right here, the first thing we have is our quick access toolbar. Now the quick access toolbar allows us to turn our select mode on and off. This is what we use to select geometry. So if I draw just a rectangle and I hit OK, I'm just going to go to a top view. And if I want to select one of these lines, all I have to do is click the select mode button and click on the line. If I want to select the entire shape, what I do is I hold shift and this turns us into chain select mode. So as long as all these lines that I've created connect to each other, this will chain select them all. Again, just hold shift and click on any one entity of your shape and it will chain select all the way around. Now the button next to that is our pan mode. So if we click on that button, we can pan left to right, up and down, but no rotation involved. To get out of that button, what we do is just right click one time and it'll set us back to our select mode option. Another way to do a pan is to hold control and click the middle mouse wheel down like a button. And there we go. Once again, we are panning. The benefit of this is you don't have to hit any buttons to get out of it. All you have to do is release the control button and you're out of pan mode. The next one we have is rotate, which allows us to rotate our geometry or just our screen around our geometry. We're not actually rotating the part. We're just rotating how we see it. Again, to get out of that, just right click and I'll go back to a top view here. Another way to rotate without having to click the buttons is to just click the middle mouse wheel down like a button and hold it and it will rotate. And there we go. The next option is a zoom window. So if I use a zoom window, it allows me to click the button and then drag a box over an area on the drawing that I want to see better, and it's going to zoom into that area. The button next to that is a fit all option, and that's going to fit all the geometry to the screen. And once again, to get out of the zoom window, all we have to do is right click one time and it'll turn our select mode button back on. To zoom in and out, we could just use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. And to redo the zoom window without clicking this button, all you have to do is hold Control on the keyboard and then left click and drag a box over the area you want to zoom into. Once again, the only reason the shortcuts are very important is because you don't have to deselect the option afterwards. You don't have to right click to exit it. So Control is really the only button you need, and it's either going to be Control in the middle mouse wheel, Control in the right click is another way to rotate, but you could also just rotate using the middle mouse wheel like a button, and then Control and dragging a box with your left click will do a zoom window. To fit all, once again, you can click this magnifying glass with an A in it, or you can hit the letter F on the keyboard. F as in Foxtrot is going to recenter you. Right there, we then have our zoom previous, which is going to zoom into our previous zoom. Right here, we have our views. Now, there is shortcuts for the views. So we have our top, our front, our back, our bottom, our left, and our right, as well as ISO views. So we have ISO 1 through 8. Now, the shortcut views for this is top is going to be a Control 1. Control 2 is going to be a front view. Control 3 is going to be a back view. And Control 4 is going to be a bottom view. Control 5 will be your right side view. Control 6 will be your left side view. And Control 7 is an isometric view, but it's specifically ISO 2 right here. If you're bringing in parts from SolidWorks, ISO 1 may be the orientation that you view them in a little bit better. The button next to that is whether the parts that we have up, especially solid models, show up as shaded, whether they're transparent, or whether we're just seeing the wireframe of them. Right here we have our blank and unblank options. So we could blank out geometry, which essentially moves it to a hidden window. It's not a new layer, it's just a hidden window to get it out of the way. We usually don't use blank and unblank too often because we have layers. We could turn geometry on and off, but it's also how you can hide images for BobArt and your models from BobArt. And then right here we have our ortho projection, our anti-aliasing, and our surface normals, just whether or not we're showing those options or looking at the part that way. After we look at the quick access, right here we then have a green check mark, which is always okay, and a red X, which will always cancel you. OK can also be done by right-clicking and hitting OK. Cancel can also be done through that right-click menu. And then for keyboard shortcuts, the space bar is OK, and the escape button would be cancel. Now down at the bottom, I have my selection mask toolbar. This just tells BobCAD at any given time whether or not we can select any of these options. So points, lines, arcs, splines, contours, surfaces, point patterns, text, and then the rest are dimensions. And so you can turn them on and off depending on what you need to select. If they're lit up orange like they are now, you're selecting them. If you turn it off and it turns to the gray of my background, then we are not selecting that. So in this case, if I had solids on the screen and I was to drag a box, or I was to turn off lines and then drag a box, we will not select them because they are not turned on. But as soon as we turn them on, they will show up. And there's certain features that do not use some of the options on here. So if you're trying to pick a piece of geometry and the button is turned off, it means that feature doesn't select that type of geometry. Now down at the bottom, we then have our X, Y, Z position of our cursor. Next to that, we have our views active to UCS. So if I change my UCS to say a front view and I go to a top plane, you'll see I still see my rectangle the way I drew it when I was in the top plane. But if I turn this option on and then I go to a top view, it'll actually go to the top of the front plane or the top of the side or even a custom UCS. Next to that, we have our construction geometry. So as I draw parts, we'll see these lines pop up to help guide me along as I draw. So that's whether or not those lines are showing or not. Next to that, we have our CAM tree flyouts. Now, this will be something you'll see inside the CAM tree. If this option is on, you will get little flyouts next to this. So I'm going to just start a new job. And currently, I have the CAM tree flyouts turned off. But if I turn them on, these arrows pop up and allow me to make changes to certain parts of this toolpath. So I could change the work offset or the clearance plane right from here instead of actually editing the feature. Next to that, we have our snap increment. So as we draw something, or I can do it with just a point, if I zoom in real close, this point will jump to a 1/16 of an inch. Notice it doesn't pop up until I get about halfway between there. So it won't pop up with another copy until the closest point is a 1/16 inch away from our old point. So it's just a way to sketch and keep everything locked on a sort of grid. And then finally, we have our drawing color. This is our current drawing color, our current line style, as well as our current units. So we have inch, millimeter, centimeter, decimeter, meter, and then a custom, which we could set inside the current settings, which we will see in the next video as well. And that concludes the video on the user interface for BobCAD-CAM.